Hi, I'm Eleanor, the manager of the Movement Grants programme here at Animal Charity Evaluators. In this video, we're going to go through what we're looking for in our Movement Grants applicants. I'm going to go through the overall process for the Movement Grants programme, and then finally, let's look at the expression of interest and application forms in a bit more detail. So in this section, we're going to cover what we're looking for in an applicant. And you can find more information about this on the animalcharityevaluators.org website by going into movement grants and application guidelines. Up the top here, where we have the programme overview, we cover in brief what we're looking for in our movement grant applicants. We're looking for individuals or organisations that are working to help very large numbers of animals. And this typically means individuals and organisations looking to help farmed animals, but also wild animals, and in particular wild animals with smaller bodies. So by that I mean we're not so much looking for people doing conservation work for large animals, but really organisations who are thinking about the welfare of large number of animals. Another area that is important to us is growing the movement into new countries and regions where the animal advocacy movement is still quite nascent. So we're particularly interested in organisations that want to move to a new country, or if the place that you're working there isn't much animal advocacy happening, we'll be interested to hear from you. We're also interested in organisations that are trying new things. By that we mean trying new strategies, interventions to help animals. Maybe there's something that you've seen worked in another social movement and you think that this could be applicable for animals. Or maybe it's just that there's an effective strategy that's working in one country and you want to bring it to your country and it hasn't been done yet. So we're also looking for individuals and organisations testing novel approaches to helping animals. And there's a caveat to that, which is where you're testing something novel, we really want to see the strength of your theory of change, how you are making decisions, and how logical is the approach that you're proposing. We're also interested in neglected animal groups. So this could be chickens, which is the largest number of farmed animals on land, but it could also be aquatic animals that are farmed or wild caught. And as I mentioned, it could also be wild animals that are the most neglected of all. And finally, we're interested in individuals and organisations that support the movement as a whole, often called a meta-organisation. So maybe you offer a service that the whole movement or a large section of the movement benefits from. So we're interested in organisations like that. As you go to the bottom of the applications guideline page, you'll find our FAQs, and we go into a bit more detail as to what we're looking for and why we might be looking for those types of organisations. I thought it's also useful to cover what we're not interested in funding. So we're not interested in funding projects in countries that already receive large amounts of funding relative to the number of animals there. So by that I mean if you're operating in a country and you're proposing some work that's not particularly novel, and it's already well funded in the country in which you're working, then we're less interested in that. We're also not interested in projects that help a smaller number of animals. We appreciate all the individuals and organisations that are helping animals, but with our limited funding, we're really looking for the most cost-effective project. And some examples of that is we're not interested in funding work that helps companion animals, animals in labs, or animals in entertainment. We also aren't interested in funding one-to-one vegan advocacy. We're not interested in funding species conservation or projects that prioritise ecosystems over well-being of animals. And we're not interested in funding direct care for animals such as veterinary care and sanctuaries. Okay, now let's get into the process for the Movement Grants programme. So still on this same page, the Movement Grants Applications Guidelines page, just below the programme overview, you'll find the process details. And like before, there'll be more information on the website than I'm going to cover now. But let's go through the overview. The first stage is an expression of interest. We've introduced an expression of interest because of just the volume of applications we have begun to receive, and we want to ensure that we're not wasting anyone's time. So we're asking people to complete an expression interest form, which is doesn't go into that much detail, but should give us just enough information to let you know whether you are a good fit for the Movement Grants Programme or not. I'm going to cover the expression of interest form in a second, so don't worry too much about that. Once you've completed your expression of interest form, we may or may not decide to invite you to apply for a movement grant. I'm recording this in early 2025 for the upcoming round. The application deadline is March 14th. And so if you want to apply, you will have needed to have completed your expression of interest at least 1 week before that. So I have time to review it and then invite you to apply for a movement grant. Application stage is a bit more detailed. Perhaps you'll spend 1 to 2 hours completing your application, depending on how much information you already have prepared. And you'll submit that form, which again, I'm going to cover in the next section of this video. After you've completed your application, it's going to be reviewed by a team here in Animal Charity Evaluators, and then we're likely to have some follow-up questions about any remaining uncertainties we have. So we'll be sending you some follow-up questions. Perhaps these might be about your country context, helping us understand the system in which you're operating. Or we might have some questions about the species you're working on and the best way to improve their welfare in the given circumstance. So these are the types of questions we might ask, and we'll send them to you and to any external experts to help us make our final decision. Final decision will be on who we would like to fund and our estimate of how much we would like to award in this round. That will be subject to due diligence. So once we've let you know what we intend to award you, subject to due diligence, we'll ask for a number of documents that are necessary for us to help us make a final decision. Once you've completed the due diligence process and we're happy with all the information we have, we will send you final confirmation of the amount we would like to award you along with a grant agreement. Once that grant agreement is signed by both parties, we're then able to disperse the grant within 2 weeks. Okay, now let's get into some of the forms we're going to ask you to complete. The first one is the expression of interest form. Both forms are housed on the grantee platform, and you can find a link to that on our website. The first form is the expression of interest form. I expect that most organisations should take 15 to 20 minutes to complete this, and we really encourage you not to spend more than 30 minutes to complete it. The first set of information is just your email, name, and the organisation or individual that's applying. I ask you to have a look at the eligibility criteria. We just showed that in an earlier part of the video. That's in the FAQ sections of this page here. So if you follow this link, it will take you there. And then select the box if you are eligible and do not select if you are not. We also give you the option to add your website or a social media account such as LinkedIn or X or similar if you would like to. Interested in the country or region that you work, and then we offer a drop down of how much you are likely to be asking for in your application. You don't need to put the exact amount in because people may be completing their expression of interest now and then not attending to apply for several months. So it might take you a while to finalise the exact amount. So at the point in which you're doing the expression of interest, you only need to be roughly how much you think you're going to apply for. Also asking people to specify whether they're asking for general support, so any unrestricted funding, or if they're applying for just one specific project or programme, which would be restricted funding, and that's just a multiple choice here. If you're only applying for one project or one programme within your organisation, then please can you put the name of that project here. Here's the main question that you're going to spend the majority of your time on. This is a suggestion for both this application and all of them. There's this little eye symbol next to each application. And in that, I've put in exactly what I'm looking for, or sometimes even the way that would be best to respond to this question. So really, if you're unsure about how to answer a question, or even if you think you know how to answer a question, I strongly recommend that you look at the little I symbol against each of these questions to make sure that you're responding in the way that we intended when we asked the question. It's so that we can get the information that we believe we need to make a decision. Some of the things I just wanted to pull out here when answering this question, and again, this actually applies throughout the process. I don't need long streams of prose. Bullet points is great. Simple text is wonderful. It doesn't need to have particularly like colourful or flowery language. We're just really looking very simply for what it is you're aiming to do. So that's totally fine. You have existing materials, rather than drafting lots of new context, just copy and paste from what you already have. It's unlikely that unless this is the very first application that you're completing, you won't already have a lot of these materials put together. So what we're looking for and assessing in a very shallow way, I suppose, because this is just the expression of interest, is what is the scale of impact likely to be. So some of the things I covered when I was like, what we're interested in, what interested in, is it likely to help a large number of animals or a small number of animals? And so in the short term, that could be tens of thousands of animals. Or if you have a longer chain theory of change, it's going to take many steps before you help animals, but when it does, it's going to be a very large number of animals. That's what we're looking for here. We're looking for some indication of the strength and logic of their activities and how likely they are to lead to the outcome that you hope to see. So again, this isn't the full application, so we're not going to be like overly critical on this. You don't need to have a huge amount of information, but it just needs to be like, is what's proposing likely to have the outcome that they intend. It might be interesting also to mention the likelihood of success of your application. So this kind of goes with the one before, but is something that you're proposing risky, but perhaps going to help an extremely large number of animals, or is it more of a sure thing? We're also looking to see how well aligned what you're proposing is to ACE's mission and principles. And we're also interested in how well you understand your own specific context and challenges, as well as a brief timeline of work. Again, I just want to emphasize that I said this response should be 100 to 500 words. So it might be like, we're running this intervention that's going to help this animals. The project is likely to take 12 months and we think it'll be successful because of these circumstances in which we're operating. So that's like a way that you might frame it, for example. Obviously, that will depend on what it is you're exactly applying to do. I also have this optional box here for you to fill in. This is about any additional contextual information to your proposal that might be relevant to share at this stage. So any country-specific context, any species information, research, or any references that you have. And then there is this question about whether you are a current movement grant recipient. So if you have previously received a movement grant, in order to be eligible for a new grant, you need to have completed your grantee reporting. You don't need to have it in order to have completed your expression of interest, but you will need to have completed your reporting before we're able to award you any funds. So you really want to have your reporting done by the middle or end of March in order for us to make a positive decision on your grant. And there's finally an optional question about where you heard about the Movement Grants Programme. That's just so that we can get a better understanding of where people are finding out about our programme. So next, let's jump into the application form. Once we have approved your expression of interest, you should see in the grantee platform that the next action is on you to complete. And so you should then see, when you go into your grant application, you'll see the application form here. And there's some more advice and information at the top. We've got a quick reminder of the process, and also some advice on AI usage, how long it should take to complete the application, and some other guidance we give. So I'll just mention some of these up front. We ask applicants in general not to attach documents. This has been a bit of a problem in previous years where people have completed the application somewhat lightly and then attached a 15-page document. And often we don't have the capacity to read supplementary materials. Of course, it's a bit different if you're attaching, say, a diagram. That's obviously fine. And so we haven't removed the ability to attach documents, but we ask you to keep your application response within the application form as far as you reasonably can. And assume that we're more likely than not going to read anything that you attach. I'll mention also the AI usage. We think that it's really helpful that AI tools exist, and we really want to encourage everyone within the movement to make the most of all the tools that they have available to them. For example, it can be useful as a translation device, also to brainstorm ideas. But from our experience, we've received a number of issues with AI use in applications. They tend to perform worse on detail, relevance and accuracy. And at the end of this form, we're going to ask you how you are using AI. And that's not because we're going to disqualify any applications, but we're just trying to understand a bit better about when people are using it and how, and when it's helpful and when it's not, so we can give better advice. Maybe I'll use an example. We found that when people used AI to help them create their budgets, they tend to perform worse. When people used AI to help them create their plans, they tended to perform worse than when a human was creating those items. And another caveat is it also tends to write more, a verbose language that makes it harder for us reviewers to actually engage with the context. It's much easier for us if you use really plain and simple language. And as I said, you're welcome to use bullet points and to copy any text you've used for previous applications. We did ask moving into the questions, we did ask your name in the previous round, but from now onwards, we're also just wanting to also ask you to provide your legal name, because that may well be different. And if you do have a different name, you can include that here. That's just so that we can keep track of your organisation and perhaps former names that you've previously used. Again, we're also asking here for the country in which your organisation is registered, and that might be slightly different to what you previously provided as to the country in which your organisation operates. And then this is the same question I mentioned before, which is whether or not you've previously received a movement grant. And now I'm just asking you to let me know whether you have already completed your follow-up reporting, and so I can just look that up. Or if you haven't completed your follow-up reporting, and then I can follow up with you to make sure you have that done before the application is assessed. Moving on to the next page, some of this stuff will be quite straightforward. Can you provide the amount you are requesting in US dollars? Again, if you finally confirm if you're asking for general support, unrestricted funding, or project, which will be restricted funding. Okay. I suppose this is one of the main questions. What will the grant funds that you are applying be used for? So here I would love you to cover what your organisation or what you personally do, the species or groups of animals that you're aiming to help, the geographical location of your work, the audience or target of your work, and then also any challenges you expect to face in your work and mitigating actions. In this next question, we're trying to understand how exactly the funds will be used. So we're looking for your timeline and how the budget will be broken up with the grant funding. And this is to help us assess whether the work is realistic, what you have said the grant funds will be used for, if the plan and the budget are realistic, and also how cost effective your work is likely to be. Okay, so in this question, how will successfully delivering on what you proposed help animals, we're assessing what is commonly called an organisation's theory of change. And maybe this is a new concept to you, so if that is the case, here is how you might frame the response to this question. And that is by delivering the work that you have described, what you've said you're going to do. You will have some output, what will practically happen as a result of what you've done. And this output will lead to certain outcomes. And those outcomes are expected to reduce the suffering of animals on farms, or they're expected to reduce the suffering for animals by replacing animals in the food system or reducing consumption. So maybe what you are hoping to do is you're going to advocate for some legal change, perhaps through meeting with government ministers. So the work that you are doing is advocating for legal change through meetings with government meetings. The output will be you'll have these meetings, maybe there'll be some response from the ministers, and then the outcome from that would be that they say submit a legislative change or support a new bill, for instance, and then this bill will help animals somehow. Maybe the bill improves the welfare on farms or something like that. That's a very simple toy example, but that's what I mean by your theory of change. And we're testing each step in the logic. So is the work that you're proposing, is it going to have the output that you expect? How likely is that? Are there any assumptions there that you've included or haven't included? And then is that output going to lead to the outcomes that you expect? And are there assumptions there that you have mitigated for or are likely to happen? So we're testing your logic and how you're thinking about how you've decided to do your intervention and how successful it's likely to be. The next question is asking for contextual information. What we're looking for here is something that, if you can imagine, the reviewers might not already have know. So to be a bit more specific, if you work in a certain country, and I'll just continue using my previous example, maybe you're looking for some legislative change. Maybe the legislative agenda says that this topic is going to be discussed in Parliament in the next year. So that would be some information. We might not know the country in which you're operating, so we might not know what the legislative agenda looks like. We might not know that there's a new party in power that have expressed more favourable sentiments to animals. So these are the specific sort of things that we might not know, the contextual information that will help us understand how likely your proposal is to be successful. Is this an opportune moment? Are you thinking about all the right things? So that could be country-specific information, like what I've provided in my example. It could also be species information, so we might not know the best way to help the type of farmed fish that you're advocating for. So if there's some scientific opinion on the best way to help them, like what interventions will help. So there's also research that could be useful, and this could be, and finally it could also be references. So an example of that might be, say you provide a service to the movement, maybe you want to include some references of some organisations that you've helped or some individuals within those organisations that perhaps we could follow up with. Also provide some more information here about team expertise if it hasn't previously come up. Say the work that you're doing requires some particular technical skills, maybe it requires a lawyer or someone with a science background. You could also use this field to say that you have the expertise that's necessary. It's likely that might come up in other parts of the application, but just in case. So the next question is, how will you measure the success of your application? And we want to know, using the measurement that you're proposing, what you think the likely outcome of your work will be. It sounds perhaps like I'm duplicating some of the questions before, but what we're really looking for here is to understand in detail the scale of change that you expect to see. So I've included a number of examples here. So you might expect to secure a number of corporate commitments through your campaign, and those commitments might help some number of perhaps chickens. You might expect to engage some number of schools to commit to a Meat Free Monday programme, and there will be consequently a number of vegan meals will be replaced. Perhaps we don't get that far. Maybe it's that you're doing an investigation and you think it's going to be covered in a number of national media outlets, or your social media posts will have a certain number of interactions. And it could also be, again, referring to the example of like a meta organisation, it could be the number of charities your meta organisation plans to partner with this year and the survey results from those charities. So we're not going to hold you too much to the exact numbers that you put here. You can be broad, but we just want to get an understanding of how you're thinking about the scale of work, and also how you're going to measure your work. This is a factor for us in thinking about how interested you are in learning how successful your program is and changing your mind and updating based on that information that you have. Finally, we're asking you to list some of the achievements from your organisation or yourself from the last 2 to 5 years that may be relevant. And you don't need to go into too much detail here. One sentence for each is the appropriate amount of information for this question. And then there's some final questions at the end here. So we're required to report on the amount of funding that's going to be used for lobbying. So please can you include that here again in US dollars. So we're interested in what your expenditures were in the last calendar year. We also would like to know your fundraising situation for this work, or that could be the organisation or project. So please can you include the total fundraising goal for the project, so we can understand how much of a percent of it we would be if we awarded the grant. Any that you've raised so far, any major sources of funding you have now, so you don't need to list individual small donors, but if there's a number of large grants that you've received, please include them here where you can, and any grant applications that you have in progress. As a default, we award grants for 1 year, but if you would like to set a different project completion date, then you can put that here. I mentioned here if you could include how you've used AI in completing this application, and what tools you've used. We're not going to penalise anyone for this. This is just gathering information for us so we can understand how applicants are using AI. Finally, sometimes some other funders ask us what applications we've received that might fit what they're looking for. So please check this box if you're happy for us to share your application in full with other funders. Please note that by applying for a movement grant, we may consult experts, which might mean asking about specific elements of your application. In general, we don't send applications in full out to experts, but we might ask specific questions related to what is contained in your application. That said, if any part of your application is confidential and it cannot be shared with anyone in any case, please make a note of that in any of the relevant questions where it comes up. And you can also leave a comment in Grantee below. If I just scroll down, you'll see the document upload section and the discussions on this application section. If you leave a note in there, such as this section of the application or the whole application is completely confidential, you can include that here and I will see that. You can save the draft as you're going and submit it whenever you're ready, but that's the full application form and you can press submit here. That you might have is if you are unsuccessful with an expression of interest, can you submit another one? And the answer is yes, I guess you can. It would need to be for, of course, in general, a different piece of work, because we've said that we're not interested in the first thing you've suggested. I suppose there's a caveat, which we might say we're not interested in it in its current form, and we might give you some feedback to say if it was slightly different, we might be interested. So it's not impossible that you couldn't submit with a similar piece of work, but most likely if you are not successful with your expression of interest, then you shouldn't resubmit the same expression of interest. So we have 2 rounds this year. Again, we'll probably give you feedback if you are declined in the application. If your application is declined in the first round, we'll probably give you feedback on whether we'd be interested in receiving a similar application in the second round, but maybe with some tweaks, or if we're just not interested in the the work that you're proposing, in which case I recommend you don't submit another application in the subsequent round. I think that's everything on the application form. Thanks for bearing with me through all of that. I appreciate we covered a lot of ground there. I think some final thoughts. All of the information and more is on our website, and so that's probably the first place to look if you have any questions. If you have any questions on the applications, again, I mentioned the little I symbols, the information symbols have a lot more detail about exactly what it is we're looking for. We're not trying to trick anyone. We want to know, we want you to be able to share the best version of your application so that we can make the best decisions possible. So that's what that information symbol is for. If looking at the website and looking at those little information symbols, you still don't have the answer to a certain question, then you can email me at eleanor.mcaree@animalcharityevaluators.org. And yeah, thank you. I hope this was helpful. Take care.